There are all sorts of ways people use the words rational and irrational. We might say that something is rational when what we mean is we think there's evidence supporting it. We might say that somebody is irrational when what we mean is we don't think that they're very clever. And even apart from what we mean when we say them, there's all sorts of things that the words rational and irrational can do, all sorts of effects the words can have quite apart from what they actually mean, as we'll be seeing later in this 4-part series. For now though, let's say that to be rational is to listen to reasons, and we'll include evidence as a kind of reason. So it makes sense to start out by asking, Part 1. What are reasons? One thing I think should be fairly uncontroversial is that reasons always relate to something else. So there'll be a reason to go to the shops, or there'll be a reason to believe in God, but there'll never just be a reason on its own. The philosopher Bernard Williams says, if there are reasons for action, it must be that people sometimes act for those reasons. And if they do, their reasons must figure in some correct explanation of their action. We should say that just because somebody has a reason to do something, just because it's rational in some sense, doesn't mean that that's the thing they will do or the thing they should do. I might really want to eat a whole load of chocolate, and that's a reason for me to do it. But I might also want to eat more healthily, and that's a reason against doing it. The fact that it's your chocolate might be another reason against doing it. Whether or not I do it will depend on which one of those reasons wins out, which is the winning reason. So, how do reasons work? How do we go from a fact like, Hey Ocean are selling half-price concert tickets, to me saying, oh, I should queue up and get tickets? Well, one easy answer is that reasons correspond to motivations in people. If you have a reason to do something, if it's rational for you to do something, then you must, at least in some small way, be motivated to do it. This view is called reasons internalism. Just because you're motivated won't necessarily mean that you have a reason to do it. I might be really motivated to see Hey Ocean live, but it's not rational for me to stand in line over there until I also get the information that that's where the tickets are being sold. But according to reasons internalism, motivation is at least a necessary condition of having a reason to do something. Reasons internalism can seem like it's pretty intuitive. At least some reasons for doing stuff do seem to be relative to people's motivations. For instance, the fact that Hey Ocean are selling half-price tickets might mean that it's really rational for me to stand in line and get them, but not at all rational for you. Why? Because you're not motivated to see them. That's not a thing you want to do. The idea that reasons in some sense link up to what you're motivated to do is sometimes called the Humean theory of reasons, because some of what famous Scottish philosopher David Hume said seems to line up with it. In his treatise on human nature, Hume writes, "Reason doesn't provide the impulse to act, but only steers it. It's the prospect of pleasure or unpleasure from an object that makes us want it or want to avoid it. I.e., it's what you're motivated towards, what you desire, that determines whether something is rational for you to do." Reasons internalism also nicely fits the criterion we spotted earlier, which is that reasons, whatever they are, should explain why people do what they do. One of the most famous examples in the philosophical literature is of a guy who really wants a gin and tonic, and he has a bottle of what he thinks is gin but which is actually petrol, and he mixes the drink and drinks it. So, was it rational to drink petrol? Yeah, he really wanted a gin and tonic, and he thought it was gin, so that was a rational thing to do given those desires and beliefs. That explains why he did it. Part 2. External reasons. The opposite of reasons internalism is reasons externalism. This is the idea that it can be rational for you to do something even if you are not at all motivated to do it. Even though you do not want to see Hey Ocean and you do not want to stand in line with me, nevertheless, that is the rational thing for you to do. You may have believed that that petrol was gin and you may have been really motivated to drink it, but still, it was not rational to drink petrol. You only thought it was. Arguments for reasons externalism often proceed by arguing against reasons internalism. So, one of the problems with reasons internalism might be that it relies on what motivations you have right now. If I'm pissed drunk at 3 a.m. and I really want a kebab, then it's rational for me to get one, even if it's also the case that tomorrow morning I'm going to regret that decision. This puts us in the maybe odd position of being able to regret or even condemn actions that were perfectly rational. On the surface, that might not seem like a very big problem, but rationality is often presented as a virtue, at least in the culture I grew up in. We might praise a person or a work or a design for being very rational, but if rationality just corresponds to our motivations, then all rational really boils down to is that we approve of it, which means that rationality is maybe more of a value-neutral thing. And the philosopher Max Horkheimer saw that as a big trap lying in wait for all of us. He makes a distinction between subjective reason and objective reason. Subjective reason can tell you means but never ends. It can tell you how to get to what you want, but it can't tell you what you should want in the first place. Subjective reason corresponds to reason's internalism, and the kind of thinking Hume was talking about when he said that you can be steered by reasons, but ultimately it's what you're motivated to do that's important. One of the most famous examples of subjective reason in action is the so-called dollar auction. Suppose we auction off $1 in an auction with special rules where the winner and the runner-up both have to pay whatever they bid. Bidding starts at 1 cent, and these two guys go up in 1 cent jumps. He bids 1 cent, the other guy bids 2 cents, 3 cents, and so on, until the first bidder bids $1 for the dollar. At that point, the second bidder says, well, if I give up, then I lose 99 cents, because the runner-up has to pay too. But if I bid $1 and 1 cent, and win, then I only lose 1 cent, because the dollar I win offsets the cost of my bid. So, given that he wants to maximize gains and minimize losses, it's rational to keep bidding to minimize the loss. Trouble is, it's now rational for the first bidder to do that too. If he backs out now, he loses $1. If he bids $1 and 2 cents and wins, he only loses 2 cents. And so on forever, until these two guys are bidding millions and millions of dollars, even up to infinite dollars, just to win $1. That's subjective reason. They have a goal, a motivation already, and they are chasing it. The sensible thing to do would seem to be to abandon that goal, but that would require objective reason, which Horkheimer says can tell you what ends you should adopt and what things you should be motivated to get. By the way, Horkheimer wasn't the first philosopher to make this distinction. Francis Hutcheson, to name just one other, made a similar distinction in the 1700s, but we're going to use Horkheimer's distinction for now because we're about to criticize him. Horkheimer says that objective reason used to be a lot more common in society. It used to be the job of religion, and even to a certain extent philosophy, to tell you what values you should hold and what ends you should adopt. Laws and constitutions, he says, used to be designed to correspond to the laws of reason, i.e. the natural objective state of things, rather than just whatever the people that wrote them were motivated to seek. Horkheimer goes on to say that nowadays objective reason has crumbled away and subjective reason reigns supreme. The present crisis of reason consists fundamentally in the fact that at a certain point thinking either became incapable of conceiving such objectivity at all, or began to negate it as a delusion. To this shift he even attributes the rise of fascism, since personal interest took the place of objective reason and, quote, lays the ground for the rule of force in the domain of the political. The idea that what is rational might depend on what you want to do is, he thinks, a potentially incredibly destructive idea. But Horkheimer goes wrong in a few places. He says that objective reason used to be a lot more common in society, but by his time, 1947, it no longer was. But when exactly did objective reason rule the roost? He points somewhat vaguely to the Enlightenment texts and documents like the American Constitution as examples of objective reason, but we nowadays know that the Enlightenment texts did not escape the often very subjective context in which they were produced. We've mentioned before on the show that writers like John Stuart Mill and John Locke, their ideas were ideological components of colonialism. The US Constitution was written by, and arguably to a large extent for, slave owners. That's not to say there's nothing good in any of those texts, but just that there is actually a lot of subjective reason going on there, more than people previously thought. Even Horkheimer admits that the so-called objective reason of Plato, who was all about trying to see beyond our own subjective perspectives into a bigger, more objective world, was grounded in a society that was built by slaves and to a large extent used to justify slavery, as we'll be seeing in episode 3. The idea that reason nowadays just means the advantage of the powerful overlooks the idea that arguably it always has meant that. And the idea that politics nowadays is somehow violent, more violent, overlooks the idea that arguably politics is essentially violent and always has been. Horkheimer argues that reason's internalism or subjective reason would be very bad if it was incredibly predominant. But that alone doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't. Part 3. Down the rabbit hole. Still, Horkheimer might be onto something by trying to realise the implications of reason's internalism. And reason's internalism has some very interesting implications. For instance, if it's true, then all imperatives are hypothetical. What that means is any sentence of the form "you should do X" must be preceded by "if you want Y." So, if you want to see Hey Ocean with me, you should stand in line and get tickets. If you want to stay dry, you should take an umbrella. If you want something, you should obey the law. If we're reason's internalists, then we have to take a sentence like "you should obey the law" and in front of it put "if you want what?" And what we put in that gap might potentially tell us an awful lot about what law and law enforcement are. For instance, one potential example of an answer is "if you want to avoid being subjected to violence by the state." And that answer opens a lot of doors politically into revealing what law enforcement is. When it comes to legal matters, the philosopher Joseph Raz says that the law offers content-independent reasons. The law doesn't take a bunch of reasons into consideration and say, if you want to achieve X, Y, Z good things that we thought of when we were writing the law, then you should obey the law. What it does is take those X, Y, Z reasons and replace them with the threat of violence. We don't obey the law because we think that it is wise and just and well-reasoned. We obey it because otherwise it's going to be enforced. Raz thinks that the law is essentially coercive, not cooperative. And this is something that philosophers like Michel Foucault realised before Raz did, and which oppressed minorities like black people in the USA and indigenous people in Canada, to name just two examples that we've mentioned on the show before, realised quite a long time before Foucault did as well. On a different note, the philosopher Herbert Dreyfus has used something like Horkheimer's distinction to argue against the possibility of artificial intelligence. Programming a computer with something like subjective reason is simple enough. If you receive this input whilst seeking this goal, produce this output. But telling a computer to seek its own goals is more difficult, unless you express them in a higher order subjective form, like if you get this input, change to seek this goal. Dreyfus sees computers as we know them as always in danger of becoming stuck in something like the dollar auction, unable to use what we might call common sense and assess situations in an objective way. But even beyond the law and beyond AI lurks something that reason's externalists call the central problem. According to reason's internalism, if you have a reason to do something, you must be motivated to do it. And if you don't have the motivation, then there's no reason for you to do it. So what happens when we take that idea and apply it to morality? What if you just want to be bad? And that question is going to be the focus of episode 2. If you like today's lesson, I have a tip jar at paypal.me/philosophytube. Think of it like me putting a hat round at the end of the lecture. Or patreon.com/philosophytube is where you could make a monthly donation to help me keep making videos like this one. And don't forget to subscribe.